Hi everybody. What is spaceholding? So I'm grateful to Sister Amanda for asking that question recently. And in another course that I coordinate of sorts, a mentoring course, we started looking at that with our first intake, and we didn't even finish in the first year. It wasn't the only thing we were doing, but we started creating a multi-layered document about this. And I think it's really good for us. I'm not going to give you all the answers here, and but I feel that to share a little bit of the parameters that came up with the avatar group when we were looking at space holding might be helpful for you, and then we can open this up during the course to explore together and maybe even continue, so that as, for instance, the Lotus Consciousness platform grows, as your commitment as a conscious practitioners and planetary service grows, you have a more multifaceted, multidimensional awareness of what space holding might mean. As we've been sharing quite a little bit about colonization, I think this may start to equip you to maybe start to open yourself to an awareness and a visceral even sense of what space holding might be about. Because I think that in so many Western modalities and ways of interacting, it's always about being the one who's talking or being seen. And space holding is very much the opposite. It's really about creation of a safe container for the person who's having space held for them to express. And the important thing, I feel, is to not silence people and to create the space where they're not silenced. Because this is down the line, it's what so many of us have residues of in our body. And any of you are therapists, you'll know how many people have blockages around the throat. And there's an aspect to space holding that I feel we have to really look at. And again, this is why we equip you to look at what's triggering and things like that, because actually sometimes we're holding space for things that we might not really particularly like to hear, or it could be, I'll give an example. I used to work on a mental health helpline, and we would have awful stories shared, and sometimes people were maybe going through something, and they were sharing things that were dealing with taboos. And luckily I'd had training in that with working with anthropology and the training that I received for the helpline. But yeah, this is the important thing, is to work out what you're safe with and what you don't feel safe with. But I feel that one of the most overlooked aspects, and it's not even an aspect, it's a whole spectrum of space holding, that I really feel there's a lot of naivety around, is multidimensional space holding. So first and foremost, have we opened and made a space? So in shamanism, the set and the setting, the space is really important. And if we, the space holder, come in with good intention for the space, and either articulate it in the space or articulate it when we're preparing for the highest outcome and for the space to be protected and clear, or whatever we might be wishing for, we're suddenly creating a quantum agreement that is a space that's going to be held. I think a lot of people, a lot of therapists do not know anything about space holding and about how energy works and how creating a safe container. So there's a lot of energy transference and leakage, and these things don't make the container safe for either party. Whereas if we have opened the space, whether, as I say, whether or not we do that tacitly and beforehand, or in the space with the client or whoever's sharing the space with us, then it's where we suddenly have all these alignments and allegiances called in, which again are what are comfortable for you, but we can share some of what's good practice in many different lineages with you to help that. So for me, sometimes I'm working in spaces where we're going into a very deep melting pot and a very deep um, exploration that may go beyond what looks normal in 3D. And from the years of working in quite crazy areas, and coming from quite a crazy area, I'm quite lucky in that I've seen quite a lot. So it can, firstly, I've been in what would be called unsafe situations, but being divinely helped, and I've been working with um, prayer a lot over the years, and it's really worked for me. And also, I have a really deep connection to source consciousness, and I have always felt guided and under the wing of something bigger. But I'm not here to push my belief systems or my own spiritual connection on anybody. What I can tell you is that when we go in to something and we have really used our intention beforehand, that is praying for the highest possible outcome, and that we are really putting ourselves forward to be impeccable, that even if what comes through seems really weird, as long as we know we can deal with things like trauma or just, I don't know, outbursts of emotion. Um, I had years of working with these things and years of working with people maybe with drug problems or mental health issues, and I'm very intuitive anyway, so I can tell when something's safe and something's crazy but okay. And that takes years and years and years to cultivate. And I don't really feel that there's a fast track for that, except for gaining human experience, because I've always been highly intuitive. But I certainly know that now when I see certain things, I can think I've got enough skill and experience in certain things that they're second nature to me. That means that I can weigh up the safety, what's playing through, and then look, actually, because what often is happening, but I do not want to create any complacency here by what I'm saying, is that if we listen to what a person's asking for, we look at the signs on the day, we tune in, we're being observant of our surroundings, and this is where shamanic practice and divination are really important. We can start to see, oh, this is actually what this person's needing, or it's linked to the astrology of now, or they said a thing the other day, so this is actually here. And that's why we have to spend time integrating teachings and becoming streamlined with things, because we have to be present with our surroundings. So holding space is about having presence around us to be able to roll with our tools and to implement different tools to go into plan B. And I think that's also something very important about space holding. Not that we're supposed to be acting much, but to, if we go into sort of uncharted territory, to either be able to go, right, we're now in a different space, or to be resilient and malleable and mutable to work with the client and what they need. I'm going to try and dig it out for the course. I read some great articles a few years ago which just really talk about this thing, and so people who work in palliative care, or working with the bereaved, or working with people who've been abused in horrible ways, a lot of the time space holding really is just being there. But if this is again where things like NVC and counselling type psychotherapies, well, there's counselling and there's psychotherapies. Observing the body, and often being able to say, well, I noticed when you're saying this that this happened, and asking the people how they feel and not telling them how they feel, and empathizing. Empathy is a really big one. So occasionally space holding will require challenging somebody, but often it will be after a relationship has been made and we've heard something over and over again, and there's a lack of congruence and there's a lack of authenticity really with what the person's saying and what they're implementing. And so sometimes holding space will mean tough love to create something, and sometimes effective space holding is leaving the space, because sometimes we may find the person needs a mummy, and that's not going to help anybody by us stepping in and being their mummy. And I'm going to refer you as well to some work I've been looking at recently, which is more on spiritual bypassing. But if you look up Dr. Miles Neal, he's working with Buddhism and mindfulness and bypassing. And I just feel it's really helpful to look at. I think that a lot of people going into practitioner work, so many of us, because of conditioning in the Western world, want to be liked. And space holding, I think, is very much about, as I say, being a very yin, receptive container to the person actually exploring what they need to explore. But down the line, we also, if we want to have a solid practice, we really need to look at our relationship to being liked. And if we're going into deeper space holding with a person, sometimes we are, if we're in the right divine space, sometimes we will be playing out a mirror that is actually being their nemesis in a way, but to be the catalyst to their highest healing. And this often is something that develops. It's a multidimensional tool that comes through when we're actually when we are space holding and our ego is out of the way. But this takes years of cultivation. So when we were looking at space holding with the avatars, it was very interesting. The men went off and were working on one section, and then women were working on another one. And we were like, wow, you looked at it really, really differently. So, things like how we set up the space is even really important. And then how do we also, once we're deepening this, are we creating a space that's safe for a person's ancestors to speak through them if that is what's needed, or for our guides or their guides to come through? Does the space that's being held require an integration space afterwards? Does it require follow-up? All of these things. How much do we need to know about the person before we hold space for them? Have we created a mindful contract with them about that? Or are we ending up actually in a slightly abusive contract where the person then just feels that we are that person to offload upon all the time? And this is a really big one for when we're setting up as practitioners. And I personally go through journeys with this because I feel that the Western world is too rigid and people have too fixed boundaries sometimes. But I also know that if we start, for instance, making our Facebook available to clients, sometimes they start writing to us in the middle of the night, and that can be really intrusive on our space. So I feel that there is a great problem in Western society because people don't want to give that extra mile. And I also know that when a person goes through their dark night of the soul, the person they're going to have to be with is themselves. So it's really important that we as a practitioner have compassion, because sometimes it is that night the person just really did need a little bit of support that shifted their code about being abandoned. And sometimes we have to play the mirror with them because they do need to get beyond that abandonment. And sometimes we will be told, don't pick up the phone, don't do this. And this is why it's very important for you to be always very, very present when you're holding space for someone. Because if you hold space for them the first time and you're really present with what they're sharing, down the line, if the relationship is to shift, or they need a bit of challenging about maybe they're violating the agreement, or that the relationship is shifting into something else and maybe they need to do some other work, and you've heard this thing and now, right, you've had this situation, but you're not defined by your trauma. You're not just a trauma, because this is a problem sometimes as people become just stuck in their victim loop. So that can become also quite damaging to a therapist, and especially if a person is just in their beginning years, is how much time am I holding space for this person with that? And this is this thing that so many people have in the Western world is I want to help this person, but actually sometimes we have to cut. So that's just a few little things. I will dig out our space holding documents and We'll discuss it along the way. But the first things first is really, if we're looking primarily at the moment on yin yang on the planet and this need to really understand that we have to get more in balance with the yin side, space holding is very much about yin. Okay, that's why we're holding. We're the vessel to hold the space and make it safe for someone else. So have a little think about that, and let's tune in on that sometime. Okay, take care, lovelies. Bye bye.